Welcome to Whole Health. We're happy you're here on this journey of exploration with us as we learn what it means to live a life dedicated to spiritual, mental, and physical health. Before we begin our program, we want to share a brief legal disclaimer. The information provided on this program, including any health-related advice or discussions, is for general informational purposes only and should not be considered a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always consult a qualified healthcare professional before making any decisions regarding your health. Now, let's turn it over to Pastor Jeremy, Dr. Kala Kleen, and Brittany Pfeifner for today's episode of Whole Health.
Welcome back to Whole Health, where we talk about how to honor God with our bodies. That's body, mind, and spirit. I'm Jeremy Higgins, and I'm here with Dr. Kala Kleen, who's a chiropractor and longevity provider, and Brittany Pfeifner, our functional nutrition counselor. Today, we're diving into a topic that comes up pretty often in health conversations. That's gut health. You've probably heard somebody say everything starts in the gut, but what does that really mean? Why does gut health and gut balance affect things like mood and energy and immunity and even behavior in our kids?
If I had to narrow it down, I'd say the top two reasons that gut health matters are your immune system and nutrient absorption. So something that I didn't know until I started to kind of come on this path of being like a functional provider is 70% of your immune system lives inside your gut. And I feel like that's just like, wow, to me was a really wild realization when you have like all these little kids who go to daycare and get sick all the time. And you're just like, they just catch everything, which part of that is it's a new immune system. It's learning. It has to figure out how to deal with things. But a lot of times it comes down to the gut, which is not everyone's favorite topic to talk about. Right. And I am like, they come in and I'm like, okay, how are you? How are your stools? And no one wants to talk about that. But it's so important. So when that environment is inflamed or overrun, whether for stress, infection, you have a lot of these kiddos who are a couple years old and they've been on several rounds of antibiotics already because they keep getting ear infections and things like that. That puts so much stress on the gut, and that in turn is affecting their immune system, right? Sure. So your immune system kind of stays on high alert when that's going on. So that's kind of like the immune system component. Then there's the absorption. So when you have your gut on high alert all the time, you can eat the cleanest diet you want, but if your gut lining is inflamed and leaky, you're just not absorbing those nutrients. And that kind of starts a chain reaction. So you can have low energy, poor focus, and kiddos that can come through as poor sleep, picky eating, sure, irritability because they can't communicate like how they're feeling. So their bodies are just not being nourished at like a cellular level. So that's why like healing truly most time does begin in the gut.
It's powerful, really. We have 3 sons and we've had a variety of gut issues with them growing up and had to kind of walk through and even work through what's the best route. And so this conversation, I got to tell you, I'm really excited about it. It really all kind of reminds me of Psalm 139, where it says we're fearfully and wonderfully made. Every system has a purpose. So Dr. Kala, can you help walk us through what's supposed to happen when digestion works the way that God designed it to?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of times, we're busy. We are go, 100 miles an hour. And so I know sometimes I'll give advice about like slowing down and eating. And, our parents, we always heard chew your food, slow down.
That's the first thing I thought of when you said that.
Yeah. But oftentimes, we can really help the digestive process by smelling our food and looking at it like during the process. I know sometimes if you're just cutting up onions or your produce and you're throwing it in the pot, just being mindful and aware and taking your mind off anything besides just looking at the food, really getting the senses going from the smells, then that really also helps like with salivation and salivating over the food, as we're looking at it, and sitting down.
That's hard for a lot of folks.
Yeah. But when we do that and honor that intention, the parasympathetic gets switched into that rest and digest mode and off of that fight or flight. So when we start chewing our food, it's the mechanical breaking apart of our food and mixing it. So then we have in our saliva an enzyme called amylase. Amylase then actually signals the brain to tell the stomach start producing acid foods coming down. It's one of the main reasons why I tell people, especially with acid reflux, how much gum do you chew? Because a lot of times people who chew gum, it's constantly, and it's just overproducing all of this acid and food never comes down. We do have pressure receptors too in our small intestine or in our stomach. So as the stomach expands because food comes down, then that creates then another down signal for the small intestine and large intestine. So some of the easiest and like overly simplistic thing is slow down, chew your food. So on average, people take 2 bites and it's down. And really, we want to work about jaws of steel.
So I can kind of connect with that.
Yeah. And increasing that chew time to 10 to 20 chews before, we swallow it is really helpful and very therapeutic in the way it was designed. We can get into the history of just like why some of this like commercialized farming and how we eat our food is like super soft, and we didn't have to work and put a lot of effort into the food that we're eating compared to if we had to hunter gather, scavenge, and hunt for the food, kill the food, prepare the food, and then, be able to get that food off the bone. So chewing is really important, especially too, they'll talk about in history, crooked teeth is a relatively new and modernized thing.
Really?
If you think about it, long ago, we didn't have microwaves and stoves and ovens.
Sure.
And so we really did have to work a lot harder, and it's really changed the jaw structure. And even kids now they're finding have obstructive airway disease because they're eating such soft food. Everybody's afraid that the kids are going to choke, but instinctively that choking reflex is life-saving. So that's a whole other conversation about children and oral and first foods. But in the stomach, as food enters the stomach, acid kills the pathogens and begins protein digestion with a natural occurring enzyme called pepsin. As the mixture is released, it's called chyme, and it moves into the small intestine. And then 3 organs step in. The liver produces bile to break down fats. The gallbladder stores and releases the bile. And the pancreas sends enzymes and bicarbonate to digest and neutralize and balance blood sugars. The small intestine absorbs most of the nutrients through the millions of villi and microvilli. And then if that lining's inflamed, then we're going to have absorption issues. So we're not going to be absorbing all of the good, and we're not going to be eliminating the bad. But in the large intestine, that's where we have the most water reabsorption. It hosts trillions of microbes and makes short-chain fatty acids like butyrate, which is anti-inflammatory fuel for your gut lining. If any of these steps falters and then symptoms appear, then we get reflux, bloating, constipation, fatigue. In our line of work, that's called like dysbiosis, and it can lead to things like leaky gut or permeable membrane.
Wow, that's really incredible. Each part of the body is got a job, 1 Corinthians 12, many parts, one body. It's, of course, speaking of spiritual things, the church, and we're all given these gifts and how important it is that we use them that way. But we can relate that to our body and how, every part of the body is functioning for a specific purpose. Brittany, let me ask you this. You use a variety of tests to see where that process might be breaking down. What does that test tell you, or those tests tell us?
Yeah, so we like to use some stool tests to give us a really good look inside of the gut. The Gut IQ is one of our favorite ones that we use because it lets us know what's really going on. And I'm not going to go into the nitty gritty. It's like 12 pages of data and tell you every single thing that it tests, but it gives us some really good functional health markers. So yes, it'll tell us like if you have pathogenic bacteria or yeast or protozoa, things like that, but it also gives us a really good snippet of how your gut is actually doing. So first thing, secretory IgA. So it's kind of like your gut's immune shield. Your immune system, you have different branches of it. So if you think of a true allergy, that's an IgE reaction. We do food intolerance testing where we're just looking for an IgG. So they're all immunoglobulins, but there's different kinds. This one's IgA. So it's your main one in your gut. So like we said, 70% of your immune system lives behind your gut lining, right? Your IgA is like your number one defender. If that's low, that means that gut barrier is tired. It's not working well. Things are going to get through that are not supposed to get through. And that's kind of what starts a cascade of issues. So things that can make it lower, like chronic stress, infections, medications, long-term inflammation going on. We see those. This is a lot of time. This is low when we see people who get sick all the time. They catch everything.
Sure.
This IgA is just not sufficient. Another marker that it tests for is calprotectin. So that's kind of lets us know like an inflammation. So if there's active irritation in the intestinal lining, when it's elevated, we got to figure out, okay, why? What is going on that is causing this? Sometimes it's a food trigger, infection, things like that. So with this test, this is just one little marker. If it is infection, we can see that on the test based on, other parameters on it. Another functional marker on there is zonulin. That's kind of like our main like leaky gut marker. So in your small intestine, you have these cells that need to be right next to each other, like buddies, right up, like holding hands. When your zonulin is high, those tight junctions loosen. So you get these gaps in between, and that's when our food particles can sneak through. And that's not supposed to happen. So that causes problems. So like you get toxins or you have full proteins going through that are not getting completely broken down. Your body doesn't know to do that. It's not supposed to be there. So that's what's it creates immune burden. First off, we don't have good absorption of the good, elimination of the bad, like Kala said. And then that can lead to what we see as a lot of symptoms when people come in for like food intolerance, like fatigue, brain fog, skin issues, gut issues, all those things. So a lot of times that can be tied to a zonulin kind of wedging its way in that barrier and causing issues. And the last of the functional markers would be like the short chain fatty acids, which is, we can get really nerdy with these, but they're basically, it's made when your good bacteria ferment fiber and starches. So they let us know how well your bacteria are working and how well fed they are. When these are low, a lot of times they're just undernourished because people don't eat enough fiber a lot of the time. So especially with kiddos, it's difficult to get enough fiber in these diets. So that lets us know, okay, where are our levels at? Do we need to increase our fiber? Sometimes with kids, if they're having a hard time increasing, like they're not going to eat the apple peel, stuff like that. We can add in, we have supplemental to kind of bridge gaps when needed. But these short chain fatty acids help calm inflammation. They communicate with brain. Some of them can cross the blood-brain barrier, so they can affect your mood, your appetite, help reduce, they support your mitochondria, reduce neuroinflammation. So they literally like feed your gut and they feed your brain. So they're really, really crucial. And I'm really happy that they're included on this test. But in short, your secretory IgA tells us how strong your gut your gut's defenses is. The calprotectin shows us what kind of inflammation we're dealing with. Zonulin shows us like how leaky the barrier might be. And the short chain fatty acids reveal how good the gut bacteria are feeding and how it's fueling the system.
Wow. So once we know what's happening inside, we can kind of bring that system back into order. So Dr. Kala, would you explain how the gut-brain conversation actually works? Because somebody like me, she talked about getting nerdy. I don't know if I don't know if I can get nerdy enough to understand it without you really breaking that down.
Yeah, sure. So the gut and brain communicate by way of like the vagus nerve, and the chemical messenger is called cytokines. So when the gut's inflamed, these cytokines cross the brain and cause neuroinflammation. That's when people feel foggy, anxious, and wired but tired. This is why also for our children that have autism, ADD, ADHD also benefit from functional GI testing and food sensitivities, because when we can identify what the triggers are, we actually ask those patients then to remove those burdens. Then we can help to rebuild that barrier and those tight junctions that Brittany was talking about. And the goal is that they can reintroduce these foods, but it's after they give them a system of reset. So if we don't identify and pull those triggers, it's kind of like we're trying to put out the fire with a pail of water. Right. When a fire hose of inflammation or, a cascading fire is just burning inside that gut because it's been fueled by those very burdens. And so, so then too, the measuring on the short chain fatty acids. So the very three specific that we can measure: butyrate, acetate, and propionate. Those are made when good bacteria ferment fiber that we get from our diet. So if we're lacking in fiber in the first place, we're not giving then the short chain fatty acids what it needs. But fiber can really calm that inflammatory process, both the gut and the brain cells. Most Americans, especially for those of us that live in like the grain belt or the corn belt, we do not eat enough fiber. This is often helped and aided by fiber supplementation in order to reduce and impact blood sugar issues. So a lot of times, as Brittany was saying, like fiber comes from our fruits and vegetables. Sure. And a lot of times, especially with children, people tend to prefer fruit over over the vegetables. And so when we see it in a really, it depends on from patient to patient, but supplementation, fiber is just really easy to get into for both adults and children. Also, fiber's influence on GI motility, triglycerides, and blood sugar regulation can all be impacted. So again, all these systems are all interconnected. It's not just the gut and the brain and the immune system. It can be our liver health and our body, pancreas health with blood sugar as well.
Kind of gives new meaning to gut feeling for sure. Our emotions, they really do respond to what's happening inside of us. Brittany, what happens when that microbial balance tips the wrong way, the other way? What you call, dysbiosis?
Yeah, dysbiosis. Yeah, just basically it's a loss of balance, right? So we have too few of the good bacteria, and it leads to weakened immunity, too many of the bad guys trying to sneak in. So basically the imbalance weakens the gut barrier, and that's what's triggering like your IgG, your food sensitivities, which is like a delayed reaction. So it's not like you're going to eat something and it's not anaphylactic shock, right? This isn't a true allergy, but it can be like between 2 to 72 hours later, which is what makes it so hard to pinpoint for adults,
Sure.
but
that makes
specifically
sense.
kids as well, because you're like, well, I don't know what they ate at grandma's house 3 days ago that could be influencing them now, right? But also the signs of what kind of reaction. It's not always just your gut. It's not always bloating, constipation, diarrhea, reflux. Like skin issues are a major one. That I again didn't know these things until I started to kind of go down this path that, like, eczema,
Right.
gut, acne. It can be hormonal, a lot of times gut.
Sure.
You know,
Right.
so all these types of things is just can be food intolerances, but then just also bacterial dysbiosis, fatigue, anxiety, depression, brain fog. So when you have inflammation going on, you have your neurotransmitters, your hormones. A lot of that is just mostly synthesized in the gut. So when we fix the gut, fix the root, it impacts so much of your life. So your body's like always communicating. So if the goal isn't like permanent restriction, because we don't want these kids to have to, or adults, anyone who's doing these food. I work with a lot of kids. I don't know if you can tell, to not be able to eat these things forever. But we do find when they take them out of their diet and they're really strict about it, when they reintroduce, they can handle them so much better. And even if at first they're like, they're a little bit reactive, if they follow a rotation diet, a lot of times they'll eat it, not eat it for 4 or 5 days just to kind of slowly ramp up. Most people can reintroduce these things if they really focus on gut healing during that window.
So how long does that take? Is it the reintroducing just?
It depends on how many things come back. So if you are like, dairy was the only thing that is a problem on yours and you're reintroducing it, you can try a serving of dairy and then you wait a few days and see if you react.
Oh.
Try a little bit more. So I don't start with I call them like hard dairy. Don't eat ice cream. But like you could start with a little bit of cheese and see how you handle it. Things like that. So you kind of like snowball up, and I normally will start with the triggers that are the least major.
Sure.
And then work. So but if you had a dairy and a gluten, and I have a kiddo who had 5 major categories, that reintroduction process is going to take a little while, because if we reintroduce it all and then he's reactive, now we got to start over again. And that's just not fun. So if you've already put in the work to do the 90 days, will take a little while for the reintroduction, but it's worth it to be able to know what is maybe still
Makes a
not
lot
okay.
of sense. It's
Yeah.
all about balance, and when balance is restored, everything else kind of falls into place. Dr. Kala, what practical steps help rebuild that balance? Because I think most of us are starting to think that right now. Like, give me an outline. What can I do?
Yeah. So it's one of those things, in order to truly try to simplify it, it sounds some like empty advice, but it is sincere. But the more real, diverse foods, like a plant rainbow with clean and organic proteins, is really first and foremost. Then if you want to then layer that with fermented foods like sauerkraut, kefir, kimchi, if tolerated. And we'll get back to that if it's not tolerated. Prioritize fiber, again, the veggies, the chia, the flax, resistant starch feeds and fuels the good bacteria. And then again, supporting the stomach acid. Again, slowing down, chewing well and often. If you need to aid it, you can try bitters or even possibly apple cider vinegar to really kind of help support and nourish that. And then we can repair the lining with, if there's any GI dysbiosis that's known, or if you suspect it, helpful products include glutamine, zinc, collagen, and there's a product that we carry. It's called SBI Protect, and it's really just colostrum, IgG,
Sure.
immunoglobulins to really kind of help with that barrier repair. And then rest and regulate, sleep, prayer, hydration, and movement. I would like to note, though, some people, when they're dealing with these symptoms of gut dysbiosis, they'll try a probiotic. And it's kind of one of those, you raise an eyebrow. If they're like, I was trying a probiotic, but it actually made me feel worse. I would recommend consulting a functional medicine provider, because that's really kind of a sign that it could be a condition called SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So what they're doing is good bacteria has overgrown, or it's in a location that it doesn't belong. And that's kind of one of the root causes that it can be for this dysbiosis. And so then that's a whole different protocol if they have that. Or if they add something like apple cider vinegar and it makes them feel worse, again, it would be helpful to work with a functional integrative provider that's, gut literate. There's conditions called SIBO, small intestine bacterial overgrowth, will CFO is small intestinal fungal overgrowth. So a lot of times people are familiar with the phrase candida. That's something that we can also test for, but it could also be a sign of Crohn's, ulcers, or a bacterial specific overgrowth called H. pylori. And so if you're doing things that are traditionally supposed to make you feel better and they make you feel worse, that's kind of a sign that it's worthwhile to have some more investigation.
Sure. And investigating is key. Stewardship in action. We're supposed to tend the soil. God placed inside of us that soil. It might not be like the dirt that we see out in the fields where the corn and soy are growing, but nonetheless, we have to tend to it. And I think, at this point, again, listeners are probably wondering, how do I know if my gut even needs help? So maybe Brittany, you can help us unpack a little bit of that.
Yeah. So kind of like what I had mentioned earlier. So if you're having issues like the bloating, constipation, diarrhea, skin issues, things like that, a lot of times that will point to that your gut is needing a little bit of love. So ways that besides what Kala had introduced and talked about, things that I love to introduce is like Zach Bush's work with Ion Biome. It's a liquid mineral supplement that helps support those tight junctions. So like in your intestines where they're supposed to be right next to each other holding hands, those guys. His research shows that the soil and the human gut are like mirrors. So if, like how we had talked about in our last episode, we're storing the soil. Well, if we restore the gut, we restore the body. So
right.
So, and sometimes these that is such a simple thing because it's a liquid and it's pretty tasteless, especially for kiddos to throw into like a smoothie and a drink.
Right.
Even we have kiddos who are like on the spectrum and are very picky eaters. This is something that we can add and it's very simple to do. So,
Nice.
and then Kala, do you want to chat about probiotics?
Yeah. Probiotics is just, they're all over the market and they're all not the same. And sometimes they're not always helpful. So typically in our office, we have probably 5 or 6 different options and different strains as well for offering a variety. Our daily has about 25 billion CFUs that contains like 6 different strains. And that's really good for somebody who has minor symptoms and has not recently been an antibiotic. I look forward to the day when healthcare can say, you have a confirmed bacterial infection, so you go to the pharmacy, and then here's your opposite dose for the probiotic to restore some of that gut lining. Antibiotics can serve a really, really great purpose.
Sure.
Oftentimes, Brittany and I our bias is that we see the abuse of, we're not really sure if this is bacterial. It looks bacterial, so therefore let's just put you on this antibiotic, and maybe we'll do 4 or 5 rounds before there's any sort of testing done in the first place.
Oh, wow.
There's other times when Brittany and I, when we'll get these gut IQ tests, and we can see, okay, there's evidence that they have several bacterial overgrowths, and then we can do additional testing to see, okay, well, what of the bacteria that's present in this specific patient's gut, what is it resistant to? Is it antibiotic resistant to the top 5 that often get prescribed, or is it resistant or susceptible to some of like the herbals? So we can put some patients on like garlic, oregano oil, thyme, and stuff like that to be targeted without the use of an antibiotic, so we don't disrupt all of the gut flora that's still there. But most common patients, if you look over on the bottles on the market, you'll see a various lactic acid strains. So that's our lactobacillus and bifidobacterium for daily. Then we can have spore-based. And spore-based is honestly what we put a lot of our patients that have the SIBO or the SIFO because they can't handle the other strains. So it survives the stomach acid and then helps with the reset and balance of the microbial diversity. And then there's yeast-based. So Saccharomyces boulardii, that's a big one that we have for patients that often suffer from a condition called C. diff. C. diff is, we'll see after a patient's been in the hospital for any sort of GI issue, or if you're over the age of 65. C. diff happens oftentimes too in nursing homes. And so C. diff can be really interesting. Sometimes there's a genetic predisposition to that, but it's just helpful to know so much more other than symptoms, which is why we love and appreciate the testing. And then 2, my son had some things kind of going on, and we started with the GI testing, and we got sent down to a great university GI provider, and I brought the results, and they said that, they're like, this is really interesting that you already have this tested. We wouldn't test this for at least 16 months if he failed under conditional treatment. But the traditional treatment for Cooper's signs and symptoms was just, they were going to medicate and see how long all these different medications could work before they would go to that testing.
Sure.
And so in the GI world, the zonulin and calprotectin are diagnostic for irritable bowel. But a lot of times in traditional medicine or conventional medicine, they just give you the medication for the symptoms of irritable bowel and not necessarily try to find the root and corrective in nature.
Well, I mean, kind of back to, the soil analogy, healthy soil grows healthy plants. We talked about that recently, having to test the soil out at our homestead, figure out where we could grow what kinds of things. And it just only makes sense, if you want a healthy gut, you got to grow healthy people, So when we care for what is beneath the surface in our system, that fruit will, I think, naturally follow. It's really fascinating. All of this, we have a son at home really two, one who has moved out to Arizona and one who's still with us, that have a lot of these issues. And I'll be making appointments in minutes after this. Brittany, what building on this, what else should we know?
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to share like a little bit of a story of what it can look like when you kind of start to go down this path, because it can be difficult to like do this testing and then you get the results. They can be overwhelming, and then start protocols. So especially because when we talk about the gut, I feel like in so many people's minds it's just like bloating, So to kind of connect some dots on like what other things that could be happening. We had this little guy come in who had started immunotherapy for his allergies, and he was so much worse going on this because it was horrible. It's poor little guy was having just a rough summer. His parents, like, they wanted better for him because his previous summers were bad, but this was way worse. They're like, well, do we just need to get through this? And then, in a couple of years, he's going to be better. But they were like, they just didn't have the heart to make him continue to do it. So we just did a food panel, like the IgG testing, and his gut was super leaky. Everything came back on it. His immune system was just not up to par. So not only like the pollens and allergens and things like that, because he had extensive allergy testing done, but because of that, we had the foods as well.
Sure.
So we started him on an elimination diet, and he had dairy, eggs, gluten, oats, and beef. His whole family did it, which So his parents were absolute rock stars. They put the entire family on the diet, which I feel like
that's the way to go.
It's difficult, but it's the easiest way to be compliant. Right. It's like, if you can't have these snacks around that he can't have, he's 9 years old, that's the way. So the whole family did it. And within a few weeks, they had like less congestion. He had these really itchy eyes and congestion and a chronic cough. So nothing you would think about for like, when people think of gut health. Yeah. But that literally eliminating those foods caused like a drastic difference. His mom emailed me a couple days ago and said it was the best summer that he's had in years. Oh. And she's so much so that she's afraid to reintroduce the food. She's like, my whole family could live this way. Like his life is so much better from this. So then we talked about like, reintroduction process and how we kind of walk him through that. But when you get to like the root and we're calming down that inflammation, it's not just helping his gut health. It helped his whole life.
Right. It's such a beautiful picture, and I love that picture of transformation when the family worked together and walked together through that healing. It reminds me of Galatians 6:9, it says, let us not grow weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not. They planted the right seeds. They reaped health and peace. Let's switch gears. Dr. Kala, let's talk about how stress affects the gut.
Yeah, so stress is one of the biggest gut disruptors. So when we talk about what are the root causes of this gut dysbiosis or a leaky gut, usually it's stress, medication, or some sort of viral or bacterial infection that really then starts kind of that cascade. So as it pertains to stress, when we're in that fight or flight state, blood flow leaves the digestive tract, stomach acid drops, and then motility slows. So again, it just kind of creates this cascade. So signs of low vagal tone include bloating after meals, reflux, constipation, low stomach acid, and even a flat mood. So when we think about rest and digest, we good quality sleep, right? And if our brain isn't getting either duration or quality, it just then again kind of fuels that cascade. Well, a lot of times stressed out people then also don't sleep, right? Sure. So we kind of see it. So, I know patients, they've heard it before, just manage your stress, eat right, and exercise. And, it's good advice. It's just largely sometimes unhelpful. So some simple things to really kind of maybe either get you out of a fight or flight state, or at least just turn down the intensity of it, is deep breathing before eating. Again, when we think about like even just being prayerful, even just like our posture of how we're holding our hands, even just to kind of help open it up and really be appreciating the food for the nourishment that it brings, singing and humming, or cold water exposure. I'll go to your house, Jeremy, for cold,
there it is. Let's do
cold plunge. But praying and giving thanks before meals literally shifts you into that rest and digest phase. I know some people wear wearables and they can see their resting heart rate go down. But even just setting up, 2 to 3 minutes where their only focus is on smelling the food that's prepared before them and really, resting.
Again, it's just fascinating. Philippians chapter 4, it tells us be anxious for nothing. And yet I think most people are anxious for everything. Mm-hmm. And especially in our society today, there's so many things to be worried about. At least that's what social media wants us to believe, and the various narratives that are out there. And we have to be careful. God brings peace. With God comes peace, and He guards our hearts. We know that. The Word of God tells us that over and over and over again. We just have to put ourselves in that place to receive what He's giving us. So peace isn't just spiritual, right? There's a physiological component to that. And I think it might be good to talk about other stressors, the ones that we can't see, toxins. You can't see the toxins in the air, but they certainly provide a great deal of stress. Maybe Brittany, you can weigh in.
Unfortunately, our modern life has so many hidden gut disruptors, pesticides, plastics, artificial sweeteners, antibiotics. I know before we decided to have children, I started to do a little bit of research on improving fertility and things like that. So there's a book that it's called It Starts with the Egg. And it talks about just like the candles in your house and the plastics you warm your food up. And my poor husband was like, what is going on? Because I'm going through our whole house. I'm taking out, I was like, he had an air freshener in his car, ripping it out. He's like, what are you doing? And I'm like, no, it's all got to go. Because, when you learn, then you try to do better, right? So all these things that are just so common, like now, if I walk into someone's house and they have Febreze, I'm like choking because I'm so not used to those artificial scents.
Even perfumes.
Yeah.
My wife doesn't wear perfume. I love her for that. We don't have candles and potpourris. And actually, when we just built a new home and we didn't even put a microwave in. And they were saying, well, don't you think you want to do that for the next people? And I said, I think we might be doing them a favor. Get an air fryer. There's ways of getting around it.
Yeah, absolutely. But all of those things that are so common in our world and that we maybe don't even know are an issue for our body, they affect your gut lining. They wipe out your beneficial bacteria. It's causing burden when you don't need to, essentially.
And even just simple things like what we store our food in, so things that you are also doing is, all the plastic for like the leftovers, and ditch those and opt, especially for like new couples, like on their wedding registry, don't register for anything plastic. Just get, if anything, it could be the lids.
Yeah.
Sure.
But
glass containers,
glass storage,
that kind of thing. I'm a hypocrite. I everything. I'm like always preaching glass containers, and then I drink out of these plastic water bottles. So I'm working on it.
Well, and small steps.
Right. Okay. One at a time.
Yeah. But in this state, supporting our detox pathways. So, we change the air filters in our house for a reason, a couple times a year, how we can support the liver and the gallbladder to do their job. Sometimes, back to, I know we had another episode like on fasting, but fasting is just a great way to support that detox pathway. Doing a good 24, 48-hour water fast really can help support the liver, small and large intestine, as well as the gallbladder, just giving them a rest from the day-to-day. But hydration, cruciferous vegetables like greens, broccoli, cauliflower really helps then support from the minerals and some of that purging. Some other swaps by using filtered water and choosing organic when possible. I know that you can Google the Clean 15 and the Dirty Dozen. Mm-hmm. So I know sometimes patients, they'll say, I just can't buy everything organic due to cost. I think that's just a really great tool. And then still even just the way you clean your vegetables. Brittany, do you use a different citric cleaner?
I have like a veggie wash,
basically,
that I use. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. In Genesis chapter 2, right, we read that God placed Adam in the garden, and there was a reason why, to tend to it and to keep it. That call to stewardship, it applies to our environment and our internal ecosystem as well. We're supposed to tend to the world that He gave us to look over, and we're supposed to tend to the body that He gave us to walk through this world in. And I think tending to the body means moving it. Dr. Kala, let's talk about how movement supports the gut, because this really fascinates me.
Yeah. Movement is so wildly beneficial, not only just for digestion, but everything. But as it pertains to movement and specifically digestion, when we sweat, the skeletal muscle, the heat really helps with, as it pertains to the movement for digestion. So if we were just to do simply walking, especially after a meal, how then our blood sugar, it starts to use that that fuel right away versus going to fat storage. So if we eat and then just sit on the couch, that's one of the worst things that we can do for like our metabolic health. Some simple things that people can use is like the rebounder. Remember those kid trampolines, like those little ones?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So those are known like as rebounders, and even just like slightly bouncing helps from like the gastric juices and the GI motility.
Interesting.
So our small and large intestine does a lot of work chemically and biochemically from absorbing the good and eliminating the bad, but it's also a muscle. And so if we're not using the muscles around our abdomen and around above and below it, so our upper body and our lower body, there's no motivation for the large intestine and small intestine to remember that it also is a mover to transport the food down the GI. Stretching also increases blood flow, lymph drainage, and bowel motility. So even like simple twist. I'll be honest, I hate stretching.
Right.
It's boring, but the data tells me it's really good for us. And the older I get, the more that I'm like, oh, why do I feel so much better after doing this super boring task?
Right.
But even light core work strengthens muscles that can help move food through the intestines. And again, empty advice sometimes, but the hydration is so important. Hydration plus minerals or electrolytes is like lubricating our intestines as well. And then movement keeps the river of the gut flowing, and stagnation breeds the sickness.
I love that. Acts 17:28, it says, in him we live and move and we have our being. Movement is worship, and staying still for too long, it clearly leads to stagnation. We've all experienced that. And for families that are listening, let's make this practical. Brittany, what does gut support look like for children?
Yeah, so starting simple, just trying to add color to your meals, right? Sometimes I've gone to serve a meal and I'm like, it's all like yellow or brown, like it's all one color. There's no, you know what I mean? So the different colors are going to give you different nutrients. So if you can just adding in, like if your kids are not super big fans of veggies, I sneak them into smoothies. We put kale in and we call them Hulk smoothies, and they do know, but they don't care because they think it's cool.
Right.
So just trying to add every meal, add a little bit of color, add some fruit, add some veggies, try it different ways. My kids do not like raw carrots, but if I cover them in butter, they will eat them.
Sure.
So,
right.
We just have to, just like I don't like certain foods certain ways. I think a lot of times we get in the rut of like, well, my kid doesn't like this. Well, have you tried it different ways? Because they may love it one way versus another. Or kids love to dip. So I don't love to buy a bunch of condiments because there's so much sugar in them.
Right.
And sometimes like food dyes and things like that are completely not necessary, but you can make homemade dips and it's not super time consuming or super hard if you just, do it at the beginning of the week. And my kids will eat veggies a lot more if they can dip it in a sauce.
I recently came across a social media channel that is like all they do is talk about healthier ways to make dips and things like that. Brooke actually just recently made a pizza crust just out of chicken.
Isn't that wild?
It was so good. The pizza crust. Yeah, it was so good.
Yeah.
I think parents setting the tone is important. Obviously raising 3 sons in our home, we had to do that quite a bit. And we also would do the kale smoothies, and, I would have them stand around and watch and help because I knew that they didn't want to drink it, but if they had some participation in it was a little bit different and easier to get them to share in it as well. And then over time, it was just, it was that time of the, early evening, and it just became kind of a practical part of who we are as a family. So definitely love the importance of that. Maybe stressing that with folks is important as well. It says in Proverbs chapter 22, we're to train up a child in the way they're to go. And certainly that's spiritual. We're to encourage them, exhort them, teach them, and challenge them to live godly spiritual lives. But it also includes their bodies, how they grow their bodies, how they fuel their bodies, because these are temples that God gave to us, and we've got to watch over them. I love how every part of the conversation continues to come back to restoration. Healing the gut's not about perfection. It's about partnership with God's design.
Yeah, definitely. That's kind of what we're always kind of preaching is progress over perfection, because if we're trying to be perfect all the time, a lot of times we'll just give up. So every day, just trying to make a better choice, adding in one new thing. So if you've already added in color to your kids' meals, you can next maybe you work on swapping their snacks for a better option. Little steps at a time is easier for compliance. Your kids won't get angry if you're just slowly starting the process, but also it's more doable. Switching if they normally eat some really sugary, yummy yogurt, switching that to a more probiotic rich strain with less sugars, things like that, where it's just simple steps that you can do one at a time, and just kind of set the tone for your home. It's not too late. If your kids love nothing but junk food, mine also love junk food.
Sure, right.
Okay?
Yeah.
Me too.
So
Yeah.
my son will ask, like, can we have junk food today? Because he knows. So not to say, like, they know what good food is, they know what junk food is, and they know how it makes it feel their body, but they still want it. They still ask for it. So it's not like this is perfect, but just small steps every day to just, healing takes patience, takes consistency, give yourself a lot of grace in the process. Well,
and I think it could be made into like a fun challenge. I mean, sometimes people get so overwhelmed because it's so different than what they're doing. And it's like, set a goal and invite people along with you, whether it's a family challenge of like, okay, who's going to make the best gluten-free meal, or like submit your recipes. They're due, by Friday at noon, for the next week's menu. And it's something, Jeremy, getting the entire family involved, or, if you're empty nesters, that it's a great date night, right? For you and your spouse. If you don't have kids yet, you have so much time to figure this out before you have kids.
You should be doing all of this.
Yeah. And, it's just one of those things that I've heard the quote, be the adult you want your children to become, and so sometimes it's, what do we got to stop doing and what do we got to start doing along the way? But the body was built to heal itself. God designed it so perfectly. We sweat when we're hot. We shiver when we're cold. Those are all things that God gave us. And so when we can just remove what blocks it and supply what's missing, the body honors that as a result.
Amen. And the Bible, it also says, Lamentations chapter 3, that the Lord's mercies are made new every morning. And that means that he gives us second chances. I, for one, am incredibly grateful for that. But it also includes our health. There's a fresh chance to nourish and to replenish and to restore the body. I on a journey of health, I haven't always lived a healthy life. You don't have to go, oh, well, I failed in the past, and so I'm just going to keep walking in that failure. And I think a lot of people struggle with that on the spiritual side, on the physical side, food, and certainly on the mental side as well. I've failed, so I'm a failure. And that's just not the way that God sees us. His mercies are made new every morning. He's the God of second chances, third chances, and beyond. The same God who designed the soil to sustain life, he designed your gut to do the same thing. When we feed it well and we live in peace, we honor that design. You see, when the inner environment is healthy, life flows outward. It's all the time that we have for today. We're going to link some resources for gut IQ testing, probiotics, gut healing, all the things that we've talked about in the show today. We're going to put it in the show notes. And so I'd encourage you, go to our website, wholehealthlive.com. Again, that's wholehealthlive.com to check into some of that. But until next time, honor your creator, honor your body, and live that healthy life.
Thanks for joining us today on Whole Health. If you'd like to learn more about our program, have a question for our hosts, or want to find past episodes, just head to wholehealthlive.com.